Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Titusville City Council meeting of October 24th, 2017 at 5:30. We have a quorum. I'll call the meeting to order. If you will join me in a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Please join me for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. First order of business is special recognitions and presentations. Employee of the Month for September 2017.
Yes, sir. We'll have Assistant City Manager Tom Abatai coming up and presenting Lisa Kupia, our Special Projects Coordinator, as the Titusville Employee of the Month for September 2017.
Okay.
Evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, City Council.
Good evening.
It's my pleasure to recognize Lisa Kubeka as the City of Titusville's Employee of the Month for September 2017. Lisa's been a member of the city staff for about 18 months after having successfully escaped from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. During those 18 months, she's shown herself to be extremely hardworking, smart, and capable. So therefore, I loaded her down with as many duties as I could think of, including strategic planning, grants coordination, administrative policies oversight. She's the Red, White, and Boom Coordinator. She has a black belt in lean process improvement. She's a Special Events Coordinator. And also, she plays a critical role in the Female Liaison and Emergency Management. In July, she coordinated the tabletop exercise, which was the precursor to the hurricane season. Did an outstanding job. But where she really started to shine was as the liaison to the Emergency Operations Center. During Hurricane Irma, she spent over 180 hours over the course of the storm coordinating the various aspects of our response to that storm. And she served as the liaison to the county, and she handled all the sit reps, and she did a fantastic job. So therefore, for those reasons, she was nominated and selected as our Employee of the Month for September. She did a great job, very worthy. Lisa? Congratulations.
Go, Lisa. Don't let them be mean to you. Slow you down too much.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr.
One more chance. Next item is floodplains, stormwater, and development practices.
Sir, staff from Public Works, Code Enforcement, Community Development will present information regarding floodplain, storm water management, and development practices.
I have a posse with me tonight. My job is just to let you know that the reason there's a number of staff here is because floodplain and stormwater management takes a lot of different people in the city. And so we have representatives from several departments. But the reason that we're here tonight is because of the weather that we saw in September. And from the National Weather Service, I wanted to let you know exactly how wet it was in September. The National Weather Service said that in Melbourne, it was the wettest September in history. It was 13.3 inches above normal. In Titusville, we received 16.3 inches, which ties the 1929 record as the 6th wettest on September on record. I want to give you some totals, not just for Brevard County, but for south of here, because the water in the St. Johns starts at the south and moves north. So that water impacts the city of Titusville as well. Melbourne had 274% of its normal rainfall in September. Vero Beach had 153% of its normal rainfall. Fort Pierce had 245% of its normal rainfall, and Stewart was 176%. Titusville had 227% of its normal rainfall in September. It was a very wet month. I think we're starting with Mr. Stepalovich. Isn't it yours?
Hi, may I?
Yes.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Let's see, where we go, Steve? Wait a second. Our National Flood Insurance Program. Do we have any slides that we're doing on this? Okay. That's yours. Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry. We're all confused. We've been flooded with it. Yeah.
Good evening. I'm KB Afosu, Community Development Engineer in the Community Development Division. I'll start off by giving a very brief overview or introduction to flooding events. And so flooding events come in various degrees of magnitude and frequency. And the baseline, or what we call the base flood, that has been adopted by all federal, state, as well as local agencies for floodplain management purposes, is what we call the 1% annual chance flood event. And what that means is that it is an event, it is a storm event resulting in a flood which has a 1% chance or 1% probability of occurring within any given year. It is often informally referred to as the 100-year flood. And so the calculated elevation to which the flood waters are anticipated to rise due to this base flood is what we call the base flood elevation. And the land area that is inundated by the 1% annual chance flood, otherwise known as the base flood, is called the base floodplain. And the base floodplain is often referred to in federal and state documents as the Special Flood Hazard Area, or SFHA for short. This graphic depicts the special flood hazard areas within the city of Titusville.
So going into our flood, the National Flood Insurance Program, that was started in 1968 by our federal government. 1974, it was amended to require that the purchase of flood insurance is mandatory for the protection of property within special flood hazard areas. That was for anybody that had mortgages and loans on these properties. The National Flood Insurance Program does provide flood insurance at subsidized rates. You can't just buy flood insurance at cheap rates without that. Renters can also obtain flood insurance for their possessions if they're renting on properties that are in flood zones. The Community Rating System, it's also known as the CRS. It is part of the National Flood Insurance Program. It's a voluntary incentive program for communities. It recognizes and encourages floodplain management activities that exceed the National Flood Insurance Program standard requirements. As a result, insurance premiums are often offered at discounted rates. The city of Titusville has been a long-standing partner in the community rating system. Next one. The city of Titusville right now is at a CRS rating of 7, which is 60% better than most Florida communities. That earns our policyholders a 15% discount on insurance that are in special flood hazard areas and a 5% discount in all other areas. Currently, there are 1,504 flood insurance policies issued in Titusville. The current savings right now is $38,383, average premium is $383. And as little as it sounds, it's an average policy savings of $25.52. That's a decent night out, I guess. A couple other notes that we have currently 3 certified floodplain managers. In the past, we've only had 1, but we've all gotten ourselves educated and become certified, so we all have a better understanding. And one other note that I have to say is that starting on December 31st, when the new Florida Building Code comes into play, it's going to be a mandatory 1 foot above base flood elevation for our design flood for all structures besides residential like we've had in the past. And it's going to be 2 foot for critical structures like police stations, hospitals, and so forth. So they're moving forward with this. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll now briefly discuss our floodplain permitting process. In the city of Titusville, our floodplain permitting process is governed by Land Development Regulation 3583. And the floodplain review and permitting process involves checking all proposed development, whether public or private, to check if it will be located within the special flood hazard area. Other floodplain review and permitting processes that the City of Titusville is involved in include coordinating proposed map changes and as well as flood insurance studies with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. Stormwater reviews. So apart from the floodplain permitting process, we also have our stormwater review process. Stormwater review process requires that any new public or private development obtain a stormwater permit. Under stormwater review permitting, however, the base flood that we use is the 25-year, 24-hour storm event, which produces 9.5 inches of rainfall. That is the basis for stormwater permitting in the city of Titusville and is a general standard in our region and our state. Another important feature in our stormwater permitting process is that the proposed project or development must have a legal positive outfall. In other words, they must be able to connect to our stormwater system, our canals, or outfall to a wetland or lake or the river. In some cases, they're not able to do that. And in such cases, we impose an even more stringent standard that they must retain the 100-year, 24-hour storm event, which is equivalent to 13.5 inches of rainfall, must be retained on the site with no discharge from the site. In the stormwater review permitting process, what we look for is that the post-development scenario does not exceed the pre-development scenario for 3 critical performance measures. These are the time at which the peak runoff discharge occurs, and then we also check that the rate of discharge from the development in the post-development scenario must be less than the peak runoff discharge rate in the pre-development scenario. In other words, before the project came to fruition, we look at what the runoff rate was. And then once the project is completed, we look at what the runoff rate is at that time. When we compare them, the post scenario must be less than the pre-scenario. In other words, we are keeping more water from leaving the site after the site has been developed. And the third performance measure is the total volume of discharge. And that's the total volume that runs off the site over a 24-hour period. In the same way, the post-development scenario must be less than the pre-development scenario. Otherwise, the stormwater plan for that project will not be approved.
The stormwater utility is responsible for the maintenance of the current public stormwater infrastructure.
Along with that routine maintenance, our budget this year also includes $400,000 for maintenance projects to our current infrastructure for things like pipe repairs, pipe linings, ditch bank repairs, and $130,000 for water quality improvements. What the stormwater utility is not responsible for is maintenance of the private stormwater infrastructure. There are numerous private ponds, along with some pipes, inlets, and even ditches within the city that are privately owned and privately maintained. We are also not responsible for private property drainage. There are many properties within the cities that have low areas on the property or are lower than the road or the other properties around them. It is a responsibility of the property owner to get their stormwater to our public system, which is usually the curb right in front of the road, or sometimes there's a ditch in the back of the property. Nowadays, that's all done during the development process like you saw. The lots are graded to get the water to the system. But there are a lot of older areas in the city where that wasn't done, or where the grading has changed over time, or the areas around them have changed. Now, if someone is having drainage issues on their property, they do have the ability to come and obtain the proper permits and fix those issues, whether that's through regrading of their property, changing the way their driveway sits, adding fill in the low areas, or even installing infrastructure on their property. And as said before, we also can't maintain the system to handle a storm like the 100-year storm. The system is not designed to handle those types of storms, and no matter how much maintenance is done beforehand, the areas within the floodplain are expected to flood during a storm like the one we just had, and will remain flooded until the system drains. Now, the picture that's up there shows our two main drainage areas. The red area of the city drains to the lagoon. The blue area of the city drains to the St. Johns River. So when we have the rivers that are at historically high levels like we have right now, and our groundwater table is so high, there's nowhere for the water to go. And the system and the wetlands will remain full, and areas will flood easier and quicker than they normally do until the rivers start to go down and everything drains.
And as far as for code enforcement, we're charged with ensuring that the private stormwater systems are maintained and enforced. And with that comes, they're either owned by an HOA, and then you have to work with the HOAs to get it done. But we have some older developments that have let their HOAs lapse. And then therefore we have to deal with all the platted homes that are within that subdivision individually, which we've started doing somewhat this year, and we're trying to meet with all of them before you go in there, because some have dry ponds, which are pretty easy for them to maintain, as opposed to some that have canals, swales, and ditches, which are a little bit different. Some have built fences into them and other areas, but we're charged with that under the LDRs of 3024 and 32103.
So I think we've made great efforts to make this presentation exciting and captivating. I think we've nailed that. So there are other municipal agencies, government agencies involved in our review and enforcement and process of administering the floodplain. FEMA, obviously, they're the ones who generate the FEMA maps. They're the ones who maintain those maps that we refer to. Florida Division of Emergency Management, I'm sure everybody's had some experience with those guys recently. Army Corps, anything associated with the navigable waterways, we reach out to Army Corps. DEP, St. John's Water Management District is actually the local or our regional office that we deal with in this area. So I think my slide was removed, but ultimately what does all this mean is we're tasked with administering development in a responsible manner in the guidelines of the FEMA rules and regulations to preserve property, to protect the environment, and ultimately to ensure that our residents maintain a realistic rate of insurance. That's really what the floodplain management program brings to our community. So if you guys have any questions, we'd love to answer anything you might have.
Council have any questions? Go right ahead.
Slide 11. I'm just really looking for a clarification, because I could look at that map and tell you I know what I'm looking at, but I don't. Can you tell me the red goes to Indian River, the blue goes to St. John's? Is that what I got?
Correct.
And what is, give me some land barriers here. What am I looking at here? Where is the difference? Where is it a road? Is there?
No, there's a ridge that kind of runs throughout the city, and it depends on what's been piped, what hasn't been piped. Though we have had a consultant that goes through and looks at the basins and sees where the water runs. So I can't say that there's a road. Some of them actually go halfway through a subdivision. So we can always send a closer up map that you can actually see that, because you can't tell from here.
Right.
But some of them are like wetlands, will drain, some way and the other way. So it just depends on which way the water goes.
And I would like to understand it better. Obviously, after this last storm of 100-year storm, anybody who had flooding thinks I know exactly how to answer it, and I don't. And so and I'm glad you're doing this for that reason, because there's a lot of people that certainly deserve, and you guys could give that to them, and I know you're trying. But so if I could just get maybe a map that could show me a little more clearly, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yep.
Right. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. And number one, from a presentation, thank you for that, because it was clear, it was understandable. I'm sure that there is a heck of a lot more technical stuff that goes in there, but you brought it to a level where I can understand it as a layman, so I appreciate that. And City Manager, I would welcome whoever's got the answer. So what I feel I understand is an explanation of how we got to where we are. Is there any part of the process on the front end, whereas all of the preparations have been made, there's a clear understanding of capacity, I think, which is fair and just, but next hurricane comes, is there a way that the measurement of a hurricane coming, we can say, yep, this is a 100-year deal a day ahead of time? And I guess what I'm trying to do is, if it is that 1% chance and that's the storm, by being able to say, guys, it's not just like the other 7 hurricanes you've been through. Although it's a Category 3, it's moving slow, it's dropping water, flooding's going to happen. And I'm just wondering if there's a way, it's a short time frame, but pending hurricane coming, is it identifiable to go, that one's going to blow our capacity as a community? That's a hard question, but if there is, great. If not, I'll take it later.
You're absolutely right, Council. That is a hard question.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I can't even say it. That's weather. But it's a good question. Oftentimes storms are associated with this is a wind event or this is a rain event. So I suppose the only way that we could really anticipate something like that is just to look at the track of the storm to see what kind of effects they're realizing upstream before it gets to us. I don't know any other way.
I know if there's a storm coming, our departments start preparing well before the storm's coming. We, like in the stormwater, we clean inlets, we go out and we clean pipe stitches, we do everything we can to prepare. But predicting a storm, how much rain we're gonna get, think about Matthew. Matthew was supposed to come straight in and hit, and we got 6 inches of rain, 5 inches of rain. We had no flooding. This one was an inland storm, and we got how much rain and all at once. So it's not easy.
Sure. Thank you.
Member Stokel?
Thank you for this. This was extremely helpful. I guess my question would be for those residents that are considered part of the county, how does this relate for them as far as the permit process and everything? Like, do they follow those same guidelines or should they go a different route?
Certainly. That would be administered through the county. The county has its own floodplain management system in place. The FEMA floodplain map incorporates all of Brevard County. We operate on the FEMA map, so county properties are identified on there as well. They're adjacent to our local residents, so they realize the same characteristics, and they should be operating on the same rules and regulations that we are, and we work closely with the county with that. So, but yeah, they would operate under the same.
They would go to the county for that. The city can't really do much, I guess, for them because they're considered county property.
Yeah, they would administer those requirements in those properties.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Member Nelson?
Thank you. I was just wondering, and I guess this is probably a question for the city manager, is if we could do like a short article for talking points. And maybe if you have suggestions on what people could do to prepare for these storms, just practical suggestions. Make sure this is done, make sure that is done, so that they understand what they're facing. I mean, I've lived here forever, and I know there are certain areas that I would not buy property in, but people coming from other places might not know that and might not think to look at it or think of ways to protect themselves. So I think it'd be really helpful if we had some suggestions for them, just to get it out. Is that a possibility?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Would any member of the public like to speak to this issue? If you do, this would be the time to do it. I see no one. I just want to say to staff, you did a great job of explaining it. It's a very complex issue. Each one is different. Each one comes a different direction, a different speed, both in how fast it's going forward and how fast it's spinning. So as far as I know, no one has been spot on all the time, whether they be in the military or on TV or anything. So I think you did a heck of a job. I think all of our staff did a heck of a job during this last 100-year situation. So I want to thank you all. All right, next item is we did that one. Letters of appreciation.
Yes, sir. I'd like to read the letters of appreciation we received from employees this month. From the Community Development, Mr. Tim Ford, our redevelopment planner. Fire and Emergency Services, Danny Ellis, driver operator. Janine Medina, firefighter. Adam Velkin, lieutenant. From Neighborhood Services, Rose Coney, program specialist. And Ashley Smith, interim utilities engineer.
Okay. And are there any petitions and requests from the public present on non-agenda items? I don't see anybody coming up to speak. We have completed all the necessary items on this meeting. I will declare this meeting adjourned.